His passion is to help people discover commonality when they are overwhelmed by difference. His mission is to create peace by facilitating understanding, relating, and connecting. At the core of his purpose is culture. And as he helps people figure out this thing called culture, they'll work at their peak and in peace with others. Throughout his career, Christian has had the privilege of working with people from all over the world. With his company, The Culture Mastery, Christian and his team serve multinational organizations achieve their goals in global markets. The Culture Mastery does this via tailored coaching and training programs for expatriates, as well as multicultural team. Welcome, Christian. On to you.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session. I am humbled and excited about this because this is the first time I'm invited to this EVO room. I know very little about the program in which you're participating, so my goal for today is to learn as much about you as you learn about me. And I would like to find out how many of you, and I hope I can, I only see 8 of you at this point, so I'm trying to increase my screen size to get a little bit more of you on my screen. But I would like to find out, can you, I guess you can raise your hands, right? And I can see this in the chat bar. So by raising your hand or by saying it out loud, how many of you today had already had dinner? How many of you already had dinner?
A lunch only.
Beta had dinner. Okay, all right. So I'm trying to figure out in which time zones you are. If you haven't figured this out. So how many of you have had lunch at this point of day? Ah, all right. Now I see hands going up. Okay, so a lot of you had lunch. How many have only gotten to breakfast yet? Okay, and how many of you hadn't had any meal at all yet? That would be me. Okay, excellent. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So this seems to be a group that is spread wide and far across the world. So thank you for including me in your circles. And I see a lot of names that hail from many different languages, and I suspect also many different cultures. I recognize some of your names, so I'm curious to find out a little bit more about you during the almost hour that we're spending together. What brings you to this course and to this curriculum, and how you are crossing cultures in your world. So I am seeing people from Argentina saying hello. Well, I'm not going to pretend that my Spanish is any good, especially when it comes to Argentinian Spanish, which is particularly difficult for me to understand. So forgive me, Patricia, if I sound strange or don't understand that. So you heard the introduction. That's my official corporate introduction. The simple terms is I am Silke aus München. Well, servus. So the simple explanation is I'm just a guy who was thrown out of his native culture at some point. And it struck me really, really hard. It's not that somebody pushed me out of my culture. It happened because it was part of my education. So I was a high school student in Germany, and somebody told me, hey, it would be a good idea if you went abroad and learned something. Most importantly, the language. All right, so good, let's do that. And then I quickly realized it wasn't just the language, it was understanding the people. And I went to school in another country and realized they don't teach the same way that they teach at home. And that's a bit weird. And my first response was this is strange. I don't like this. My teachers at home do it differently. And my fellow students are interacting differently amongst each other and differently with the teachers and instructors. And my first response was, I don't like this. This is strange. This is weird. This is not normal. And this was in 1988. This was when there were two Germanys. Some of you might be old enough to remember that. And it taught me something that only resonated with me many years later, that the concept of normal is useless. And I grew up throughout my childhood, my adolescence, my early adulthood, that normal, and you see I'm making these air quotation marks. So for those of you for whom this might be a gesture that is not familiar, when I do this, this means I'm putting it into quotation marks, meaning the word itself, I'm questioning the meaning of the word normal. That's what I'm trying to symbolize with this gesture. And it became apparent to me that this concept of normal is fairly useless, because who decides what is normal and who decides what is not? And if the people that decide that, do I recognize them as an authority to tell me that, or do I not? So throughout my childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, I had family members, mom, dad, grandmother, grandfather, teachers, uncles, define for me and for all the other kids what is quote unquote normal. And that worked as long as I was at home. And the minute I stepped away from home and moved into another country to live with a family that was up until then completely unknown to me, it was a host family who was kind enough to take me in for a full year, I realized that what I considered to be normal was not adhered to in this other world, that they had their own definitions of normal. And some of them didn't work for me, or I did not understand them, or they did not make sense to me. And this experience was quite healing in a way, or important for me, because in the year 1988, as an exchange student, I was 17 years old. So I don't do math in public, but I'm sure you can figure out how old I am now. So at this age of 17, some of you, I see some men on here. I don't want to speak for the women, but I will speak for some of the men on here. You might remember what you were like when you were 17. I was fairly self-absorbed and in my hormonal development, and also very confident of my own abilities and very assured of myself. And having that experience of living in this other country, going to school in a different environment, took me down a notch and 2 and 3. And I recognized that, maybe I'm not such a great or maybe I'm not such a superstar the way I see myself after all. Maybe there's things that I don't know yet. Maybe I need to learn things that I didn't even know I didn't know. And that was humbling, and that was also a bit scary. And at some point, it was immensely exciting to me. And this is why I do the work that I do today, because the experience of something that is not normal by my standards, it draws me to itself like a magnet, like a light is to a fly. I feel like I need to find out, what is this thing, or what is this behavior, what is this attitude, what is this food, music, teaching style, literature, architecture, fashion, that is not like I see normal. And my children will tell you that it's really difficult to go in public. Well, now we don't do that as much anymore with COVID, but when my family and I go out in public and I hear a different language, or I see somebody who appears to be from a different cultural context than my own, I feel myself drawn to that. My curiosity takes over, and I sometimes cross align by starting to investigate. And my children are like, oh gosh, let's grab dad before it's too late, because we will never get out of here, because he will start a conversation with this random stranger. So let's grab him because we have other things to do today. So this was something that was inspired in me by going abroad. So the long story of this, or the short message of this long story is, I suspect that many of you work in the educational field. At least this is what Patricia and Mushtaq referred to me. If you can instill or inspire or spark the idea in your students that going abroad or going outside of their normal is something that will benefit them, then my job today is done. My big plea to all the educators in the world would be to tell your students, inspire your students to leave their zone of, well, some would say comfort zone. I would like to say their known zone, the zone of things that they already know. Push them outside, because that's what you do on a daily basis anyway, right? You push your students into unknown zones where they need to learn a new topic, a new task, a new piece of information. And if that unknown zone could be outside of their cultural normal, then you will do your students a huge favor, because my teachers did it to me. They pushed me out, and I'm eternally grateful to them, because it took something away from me, which I back then didn't know I don't need anyway. You may have seen horses who pull a carriage. Horses have these blinders, so they only look straight forward and are not sidetracked or panicked by things that happen in their peripheral vision. I had these blinders taken off by being taken out of my own native culture. And all of a sudden, the picture made sense to me. All of a sudden, I recognize, oh, there is so much more to see, which sometimes doesn't serve me because I'm pulling the carriage this way or that way, and my family behind me says, "Oh, Daddy, hold on, don't go too far away from the trail that we want to go." But I think curiosity is a beautiful thing, and I believe in the value of every different set of normal around the world. It's I think, I don't know who said it first, but I like this comparison. Normal is only a setting on your washing machine. So there are many different sets of normal around the world, and they all have their validity. What's normal for you at home? Great. What's normal abroad? Also great. Knowing that what I consider to be the right way of behaving or the right way of showing up in life does not always work in another context, and recognizing that showing up a different way is just as great and brings in insights that I possibly couldn't have had only sticking to my path, that added a lot of value to my life. So this is how I got into this field. So I don't know how much all of you are familiar with the concept of cross-cultural learning or cultural intelligence in general. So I'm simply going to ask a question. How many of you are familiar with the basic cross-cultural comparison frameworks? So give me a show of hand or click the raise hand button if you are familiar with the likes of Trompenaars or Hofstede or Aaron Meyer, or there are so many out there, so many cultural comparisons. Okay, quite a handful of you. Julia, I've seen your profile on LinkedIn. I've seen you're based in Germany, but I see your name looks Russian, so I'm trying to pronounce it properly. Staltovna, is that correct?
This is Yulia Staltovna, and I come from Ukraine.
Ukraine. All right then. And nice to meet you, Yulia.
Nice to meet you.
And this is something that I would like to continue here. I would hope that I could encourage you to take yourselves off of mute and maybe have a group dialogue around this, rather than me pontificating about the benefits of cultural intelligence and why it's so great to learn about different cultures and experience them. I'm curious to hear what drives you to learning more about this, and maybe I have an answer or I know somebody who does. So how many of you have lived outside of their birth culture or their passport culture? Oh, quite a few. All right, then I'm gonna pick on some of you, and I hope I will not put you on the spot in an uncomfortable way, but I'm going to go with a name that looks Anglo to me, and I hope that Anglos don't mind that as much. So Nicole McVeigh, I hope I'm saying your name right. Is it McVeigh or McVeigh?
McVeigh.
McVeigh. So Nicole, tell us where in the world you are, what your native culture is, and which other culture you experienced intimately.
Yeah, so I was born in the United States, but I live in Costa Rica.
Oh, Costa Rica. And how long have you lived there?
6 years.
So I suspect your Spanish is solid.
I get by.
Right. So how have you experienced this shift of normal going from the US to Central America?
Well, I was kind of with you on this about the drawn for curiosity, because I always studied Spanish when I grew up in New York, so I was surrounded by language, and I do remember especially with Spanish, I wanted to know if I heard someone speaking Spanish, I wanted to know what country they were from, because I wanted to fine tune the accents. So I wanted to know the difference between a Colombian talking Spanish to a Venezolano to a Puerto Riqueño. So yes, I was very drawn to that.
Was that because you lived in the city and you heard many different Spanish accents already growing up, or
Yeah,
because you studied Spanish?
Yeah, my father owned a deli, and so we would have a lot of workers coming in, Salvadoreños and Cubanos and things like that. And so I would hear it, and I could tell I remember I was like in middle school, high school. I could tell that the Spanish was different, but I didn't quite know exactly why. So then I was trying to this. So that kind of drew me to languages in general. And so and then I studied to be a teacher, and became a teacher of English. And so that brought me here to Costa Rica.
Beautiful.
And I do think with what you were saying, I have children. And so my children were 3 and 5 when they came here. And my son felt that kind of normal thing, what you were experiencing. I picked him up from school one day, and he just stood there in the parking lot and just screamed. He's like, I don't understand anything. It's not normal. And it was a struggle. And it took a while for him to kind of, realize that what he experienced in the United States is different than here. It's different. It's not bad. It's not, abnormal. And there was that adjustment period. So
nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, Nicole. I might come back to that. Silke, I saw you posted a question in the chat box, and then the window disappeared. Why don't you just ask it out loud? And
yeah, sure. Christian, you talked about cultural intelligence earlier, and it's a term I've come across quite a bit, but I've also keep coming across the term of intercultural competence, which is what we should strive for. And I'm not quite sure, where do you see, is there a difference really? Would you see a difference? What's your take on that? Because I think they're both concepts, and I cannot really seem to find a difference. So I'm curious. So it's the same thing.
And I'm probably a heretic in this regard, because I don't consider myself an academic in the field of intercultural studies. I didn't go to school for that. Let's put it that way. I majored in political sciences and history and American studies. So I was one of those in those of you who went to the German school system, and maybe it's only Silke and Julia, but maybe others of you know, I went through the school system when there was still the old degrees. So I had a Magister in my as a degree for my studies, and my major field. Everybody said, well, what you going to do with that? You're going to either be a cab driver or selling fries at a corner shop. So that was how my field of study was regarded, because it wasn't worthy of a commercial application. I'm still out to prove the difference. So I don't see that the terminology and defining it in a hair-splitting way is furthering the conversation.
Okay,
So
works for me.
I use these terms interchangeably. Okay. And I'm sure that there is some nuance left by doing so, and I'm sure there's somebody much smarter than me who will say, well, but haven't you considered? And I will say, I probably haven't, so please teach me. So I'm not saying I'm the smartest person around this. I simply use these terms as guidelines or as mile markers, so to say. So does that answer the question?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. So then, let me. Well, Julia, I'm going to pick up on some of the stuff that you're posting in the chat box here. There's a bunch of links. So what are you sharing with us here?
That is the episode of the podcast that we are doing with my colleague on Live and Learn, and there are 3 seasons there, but the episodes that I picked are specifically about the building intercultural competence, intelligence, living as an expat, learning new cultures, and so on. So this is not a lecture style, not even close to Hofstede, but still this is how to apply and how we apply this. So if anybody is interested, sorry for a little bit product placement here.
No, hey, I'm sure it serves all of our learning. So thank you for sharing. And this is something that, I mean, I typically don't work with educators. Our clients tend to be in the corporate world, so they're either expatriates who leave their native culture to work abroad in another culture, or we're working with companies who have multinational, multicultural teams. And I think the concept of becoming culturally more savvy is always the same. It's breaking out of the ignorance state into the curiosity state, and then into a continuous learning and accepting, adjusting state. Some of you might be familiar with the model of Milton Bennett, one of the granddaddies, the big gurus of cross-cultural studies. Milton Bennett model, going from ethnocentric stages of denial and minimization over into acceptance, adjustment, and so forth. So there's a 6-stage process. And I tell our clients, it's not only about the cultural intelligence. Yes, you want to be driven to learn about other cultures. You want to have a curiosity, and then you want to fill in your knowledge blanks, and then you want to develop an action plan as to how to apply this knowledge, and then actually in the 4th step, really apply it where the rubber meets the road, so to say. Actually put it into action and practice your knowledge. Which will, it's like a circle, right? If you're familiar with the 4 steps of cultural intelligence circle, so there's the drive. First, you want to be driven to learn. Then there is the knowledge part where you fill the knowledge gaps. Then there is the strategizing, and then there's the action where you take it into application. And that is a perpetual circle, because once you apply what you learn, you'll discover new things that you didn't know before, and then you're driven to the next go around. But I don't think this is the only saving grace for being successful in a multicultural world. I think we need to understand also the personalities behind it. So if you're familiar with cultural comparison frameworks, you are probably familiar with cultural dimensions, with these measurement tools that juxtaposition or juxtapose different behavioral extremes. So for those of you who don't know, I'm just briefly touching this. So many of these cross-cultural frameworks look at human behavior as bipolar opposites, and they plot individuals on, or cultures on, a continuum between these bipolar opposites. So let's say one would be a culture is highly individualistic, where it's about the me, I, and another culture, the opposite extreme, is a we culture, a collectivist, a communitarian culture, where it's all about the we, togetherness, and the individual is less important. So this is one very well-known cultural dimension between individualism and collectivism. And then we look at these comparisons, and all these frameworks offer us a dot on this grid for certain cultures. Interestingly, all of these models offer a dot on the grid in the form of a flag or in the form of a nationality. So these frameworks will tell you, well, US Americans are hyper-individualistics and Mexicans are very collectivist, as are Indians. All right, so there's 1.3, 1.4 billion Indians. There is, I don't know, 180 million Mexicans. I should have checked the number. So they're all at the same spot on that grid. 340 million US Americans are all in that same spot on this comparison. That is interesting. So all members of a nation culture, all people who hold the same passport have the same behavior by that model? Interesting, I thought to myself. I mean, I'm being very heretic here, and I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek. These cross-cultural comparison models help us, of course, to understand different behaviors, but I would really caution us to give them too much value. Because those of you who work in or live in cultures with big diversity within, I mean, Mushtaq and I, we talked yesterday. Mushtaq lives in Southeast India, if that is correct, right? He lives in Hyderabad.
Yeah, Hyderabad, South India.
People in Hyderabad are not the same as in Kolkata or in Delhi or up in Punjab or over in Goa, right? So you have the same passport, but you don't have the same behaviors. You have different cultural nuances. The same is true for China. The same is true for, I would argue, for Argentina. You have people in Buenos Aires, porteños, and you have people that live out in the plains, farm people out in, I don't know, Neuquén. They are different than people in Buenos Aires. US, you have the two coastal extremes. You have the Northeast, New York, Boston, DC, Philadelphia, and you have West Coast, LA, San Francisco, or up the Pacific Northwest, and everything in between. So there are no such things as monolithical national cultures. So that's why these comparison frameworks can easily be a little bit misleading unless we look at the difference within and also look at different personality traits. So what we, yes.
Christian,
yes,
yes, there are people raising their hands. I don't know whether they want to say some comment on this. Lane, perhaps, is there anything you'd like to add, or we're just raising your hand on?
I think my hand was stuck up there from before. You have to manually lower it.
Yeah, that's right.
But you know, I can always talk, so that's no problem. I have one question I posted in the chat about this, which is many of us do deal with cultural differences in our field, you know, in TESOL. But sometimes we go beyond apples and oranges, just differences, because that's our bread and butter. But what happens is sometimes there are practices that you question whether they're even humane. In today's world, we don't have a lot of that, but we have pockets of it. And I never know how to address that. I mean, how do you respond to things like genital mutilation? You know, can we talk about that? It's difficult to even talk about it. I can't even say it without trembling in my voice. Am I being judgmental in that way, or is there a line? And a slippery slope is what we talk about sometimes. Right. And where's the line? Is there a line? Do you find in your work that this comes up when people say, but what about in this culture where they do blah, blah, blah? I'm supposed to just accept that?
Yeah.
Can you respond? Thank you.
That's a a good question and a tough one. Thank you. The whataboutism is something that I want to address that from two angles, right? In mature democracies like the one I live in the United States, where pluralism has taken an interesting turn over the last, let's say, 2 or 3 decades. We've seen a lot of the whataboutism in order to justify one behavior. We point to another one, often completely unrelated, in order to justify our own doing, saying because the other group is doing this, so I should be doing that. And if you're claiming this to be okay, then let me be okay here doing that. That is something that pluralistic societies will have to, I think, come to a solution for themselves, which is hard for us as interculturalists to take a position on. The other point that you're mentioning about, I've heard it referred to as cultural relativism, that if I claim that every culture, every normal has its validity, like I did earlier, if that is your question, Elaine, where do I draw the line if it comes to things like genital mutilation or the systemic marginalization of certain populations within a nation or within a zone of influence? Let's say Uyghurs in China, Black people in North America, you name it, Rohingya in Myanmar. Where do I draw the line? I draw the line for myself personally. I'm not sure if our field has an answer for this. I would, before I jump to a conclusion, before I jump to judgment for something that I condemn, I mean, genital mutilation I condemn, period. But the condemning in it by itself is unlikely to help me resolve the issue. So I want to go back and find out, well, what leads to that behavior? What value system is it that has been driving this behavior or has made it okay for a dominant majority in that culture to continue doing this? And once we find out what value system justifies or tries to justify that behavior that I reject, then I could start working on introducing other values, or at least remind. In terms of genital mutilation, I'm not an expert, but I'm suspecting it has to do something with a patriarchal society that values women less than men and has a value of domination of the male over the female. However, in that society, women will have a role that benefits the society, ergo men as well. So which values can I amplify in front of the perpetuators of genital mutilation? That, hey, if you continue doing this, then your women will either leave the country because they want to run away from this practice, or they will start fighting back, or you will have continuous stress, pressure, pain, unresolved societal issues. So what is it you want, right? So I could only become a change agent. I think that's the easy answer, or the short answer. I can only see myself as a change agent in that behavior if I truly understand the whys of the behavior. You may have seen models of icebergs or trees or other visualizations that explain culture. You see the tip of the iceberg that is above the water surface, and then you see the whole body of the iceberg hidden underneath the surface. So when we throw out these terms that describe a behavior like genital mutilation, we're first and foremost looking at the tip of the iceberg, right? We see the phenomenon. We don't see the root. We don't see what's underneath. So I sometimes say what's above the water surface are the do's and the don'ts. That is that which is easily learned, that which is easily memorized, and I'm sure there's an app for that. And what's underneath the surface are the whys, the drivers of these behaviors, and it sometimes takes forever to figure out what they might be. So I don't have I'm not sure if this is a satisfactory answer to you, Elaine, but for your question was, where do you draw the line? For me, I draw the line in your example that I reject that behavior. And yet I also recognize that I won't be able to change it unless I figure out what are the values driving it. Does that make sense to you? All right.
Yes, thank you.
I know I'm rambling on quite a long time. So are there questions in the chat box that we may have missed and that add to the conversation? Patricia or Mushtaq, I'm relying on you to point me to those.
Yes, sure. Participants can raise their hands and ask to make questions directly. So if you have anything to ask or say, now's the time to.
Nicole is sharing something. Nicole, could you please say it directly? That would be better.
Yes. Sure. So for me, that's when you were talking about this, it's dialogue is so important. And this is kind of what I'm doing my doctoral research on, is that understanding is one thing. Being a change agent, that's, for me in my field, our students were molding them to become change agents. And what does that mean? But also we need to share stories. We need to understand. We need to talk to people from Somalia to understand what is going on, what is the history. And we all come from we all have our own backgrounds. We all have our stories to share and to tell. And we need a safe, open place to be able to dialogue about it. And I think for me, I'm getting my studies in peace and conflict studies. And I'm idealistic. I think that part of the peace processes can happen if we just talk and understand each other. And that is why I think storytelling and sharing cultural stories, sharing about what we, where we come from and what we do and why we do it, can help bridge that gap.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, Nicole. And in addition to that, I want to point to a comment in the chat box by somebody whose name I will not pronounce until I heard it first, but it starts with 70B. So thank you for putting a number before that. Makes it easier for me to avoid mispronouncing the name. Is self-introspection beneficial is the question. And I think you hit the nail on the head, 70B, because any form of cultural intelligence begins with ourselves, right? How can we understand what is different if we're not aware of who we are, what our normal is, what our behavioral preference is, what our desired outcome in behavior is? So I typically would say in very simple terms, it's a three-step process. Know thyself, figure out what is the difference to the other normal, and then develop strategies how to bridge those gaps or minimize them, perhaps even close the gaps. Sounds easier than done, but sometimes it's possible. So without knowing what your own behavioral preferences are, what your driving values are, it will be hard to have a full-bodied experience of what is a different normal, because unless we're aware of the biases and the lenses through which we see the world, then we won't be able to recognize that others may view it through different lenses. So there is this concept and I'm not a psychologist, however, I'm a practitioner of neurolinguistic programming. And there is this concept of in NLP called the map is not the territory. I see some of you nodding their heads, so you may have heard that before. So the map is not the territory, meaning that the mental map that every one of us creates of the reality in which we exist and move around, our mental map is merely a simplified, redacted representation of the real world. And how we create that mental map is through our own filtering process. We delete, we distort, and we generalize the information that we receive so we can sort it into our framework of cognitive experience. And some of us do, and we all do this through our 5 senses. These are the sensory receptors that are at our disposal. We can see, we can hear, we can touch, we can smell, we can taste. Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. These are the 5 senses at our disposal. And at every given moment, we receive millions, billions of bits of information coming from different angles all the time. Just right in this very moment, if you're looking at your screen, you see different visuals. You see this guy with his big bold glass and his white shirt wildly gesturing in front of his camera. You hear the sound of my voice. And if you're sitting down, you probably, if you think about it, you probably feel your rear pressing against the seat cushion or whatever you're sitting on right now. If you take a deep breath, you'll smell what's in the air. Maybe it's the remnant of lunch. Maybe it's coffee brewing in the corner or tea steeping in front of you, or maybe it's the brisk, cold, fresh air coming in through the open window, whatever it is in your environment. So you hear right now, you see right now, you feel, maybe you taste, maybe you have a taste in your mouth from whatever you drank 5 minutes ago. So we all receive dozens, thousands, millions of bits of information at any given moment. And our brains would be in overload if we took every data point and decided, is this good information or is this bad information? What do I do with this information? Let's analyze this. No, our brains don't do that because we wouldn't get anything done. So our brains delete, distort, generalize, and that's how we form the map of our world. But our map isn't the territory. The territory is multifaceted and is much richer than our deletion and distortions and generalizations allow. So our brains do not compute all of our human existence at any given moment. So how we delete, distort, generalize, how we create our map is unique to us. And the more we know about how we do that, the more we become aware of our own weirdness, of our own crazy worldviews and biases and quirks. And I mean, I'm going to make light of this, but I like our dishwasher to be loaded a certain way. And when I open up the door of our dishwasher and see somebody in my family just randomly put stuff in there, I do this. I take this deep breath. All right. And I start rearranging it. I'm surrounded by 3 women in my household, my wife and my 2 daughters, and they already know when daddy opens the dishwasher, like, all right, here we go again. That is my map of the territory. They don't care about it the way I do. So as I recognize my own weirdness, and let's be honest, we all have some sort of weirdness. It may not be the dishwasher. I'm sure you have some kind of weirdness. You don't have to share it here, but if you're going to be honest with yourself, we all have these quirks, I call them. The more we are aware of our lenses, our limitations, the easier it will be to relate to somebody else, because we now know they probably have that too. And let me find out what their filter filters. So maybe that's an answer to what Silke asked earlier. Cultural intelligence may be what drives us to become an investigator or a detective in finding out how other people put on their lenses and how other people filter their reality. Because if I'm aware firstly of my own filters and my limitations, and then inquire about other people's filters and self-imposed limitations, that's when I'm able to connect and relate. And sometimes I might silently inside of my head laugh about somebody else's filters. I might at first belittle them, Remember Milton Bennett's model of acculturation? At first, I might be in denial, or I might defend my own filters, say my filters are better than yours, us versus them. But over time, we'll recognize that that's what happened to me as an exchange student. Over time, I recognize, they do it differently. I think that's stupid. But somehow, they still get results. That is strange. How do they still get results even though they don't do it right? Because the way I do it is right, obviously. But they get results. So that's what, when you reach that moment, when you recognize that being not normal and still succeeding, then you recognize, oh, wow, maybe there is some validity to that filter, to that map of that person's territory. So I'm using a lot of different metaphors, and I'm mixing them wildly. I hope I'm not losing you in this, so let me check back in with you. Any questions or any comments around this? Oh, somebody said we have a sixth sense, which, okay, I'm curious to find out, what is the sixth sense that I'm missing? Again, 70B. Well, would you share that with us? What is the sixth sense that I'm missing? So, Mushtaq or Patricia, do you know? Did you see that in the?
That 70B is from India, perhaps, Mushtaq?
Yeah. Subrabito, would you like to share? Yeah, he says intuition.
Intuition, yeah.
Intuition. Okay.
Yeah, the gut feelings.
Gut feeling, intuition.
Okay, I find that fascinating, and I'm wondering, how does everybody have the same sensory receptor for that? So how do we practice intuition? That's my question, I don't know this, isn't our intuition based on our inherent value system?
If I may.
Yes, please, anyone.
Sure.
Yeah, the recent research on neuropsychology says that they found fantastic connection of the gut feelings and what is happening in our stomach when it gets contracted and shrinked, very well connected with the brain circuits. And they found out how much there is to learn about it, and that this gut feeling is known for centuries, but now if you follow actually the research, they keep on saying that this is a part of our neural system, and therefore it cannot be seen only as an inherited or values. This is also the neural connections and neural responses.
So then it is something that is triggered by an experience, right? Is it connected to our what some refer to our reptilian brain, the fight or flight reflex?
Well, it's not only amygdala, but also the prefrontal lobe parts and so on. So the research is now on, and it is super exciting. But what they already know that this is a response. So just like as limbic system, as mentioned, so this is like another kind of responsive system which is yet to be discovered in full.
Well, there we go. See, didn't I say that I'm going to learn something from you? There we go. Thank you.
I will try to send a link if I find it quickly.
Thank you. And I know this is a crude comparison, probably completely inaccurate. However, what you just explained, Yulia, reminds me of a movie I watched a few years ago, and some of you may have seen it. It was billed as a science fiction film. To me, it turned out to be a highly spiritual movie. It was called Arrival. Mm-hmm. And if you get a chance, watch it. It might be available on the various streaming networks in your country. Arrival is a movie about extraterrestrial vessels, spaceships coming to Earth and they come to Earth at the same time in many different locations around the globe. And they try to communicate with humans, and humans see a threat in it. And there are multiple different reactions to these extraterrestrial spaceships. And in the end, the bottom line of the story, without spoiling it for you, in the end, what these extraterrestrial visitors do to us as humans is to trust our intuition and to come to a cross-cultural understanding. So on the outset, it may look like a science fiction film. In the end, it's I would say it's highly spiritual. So if you get a chance, it's called Arrival, with Amy Adams as one of the lead characters, and Jeremy Renner, I believe, was the male lead. So thank me later, or watch it and tell me, oh, this was nonsense, I didn't like that at all. Either way, I'm open to that feedback. Any other questions or comments that I missed or should be looking at? Well, then let me ask you, how many of you are active in their teaching profession? By just click the raised hand button. How many of you are teaching? Oh, wow, that's a lot of you, almost all of you. Excellent. So when you teach, do you teach high school age, secondary education, or primary, or post-secondary? How many of you teach primary? Okay, that's a handful. How many of you teach secondary? Okay, a little bit more. And how many of you are in post-secondary academia or vocational? All right, quite a few of you. Excellent. So who wants to share an example or a story where they recognized as teachers that they did not pick up on a cultural difference in the classroom or in the lecture room, where your lack of cultural intelligence made it hard for you to teach students? Does anyone have an example they can share without making themselves look too stupid? but I'll be the first to admit I made these mistakes. I continue making those mistakes, so you're not alone. So who wants to share one of their cultural foo moments? Maria Marta Mora.
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Maria.
This is something that usually happens to me, and as I wrote in the chat, this is one of the reasons why I'm joining these sessions. And this is, I work in secondary school in Buenos Aires, and I teach students from our own neighborhood, from other provinces in our country, and from some neighboring countries. And also have new students. We've been having Venezuelan students. What worries me a lot is the situation I sometimes have in the everyday classroom with especially Bolivian students. They are too quiet, but this is my map, I think.
Right.
So I need to learn what their territory is. And I find it really hard, in spite of the fact that I've been working with them for almost 20 years. And when I want them to speak in class, and I wonder, why is it that they don't speak? And is it because they don't want to? Because when I ask them, for example, well, we're checking homework. So what about you? Would you like to, I don't know, check answer number 5? And many of my Bolivian students go, and I say, what is it? Am I making them feel uncomfortable? I want them to speak. I want them, but this is what I want. I need to learn to respect their own way. And at the same time, I'd like them to get some speaking skills. So I have to find my strategies. That's it.
So, is this something that is an ongoing concern of yours, or have you found, after all these years, have you found some answers to that phenomenon?
I've just I found some strategies. One of them is asking them to record themselves when nobody is around, when no classmates are around. So sometimes they record themselves on their mobile phones, and then they send their recordings to me. And in that way, I can get some results, right?
So
But it's really hard.
Is that
because
evidence?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry.
Go ahead, Maria.
I think that I'm still in my position of the teacher there, waiting for them to comply to my own culture.
Okay.
So I still have to move from that. I'm about to retire, and I haven't. I mean, I can't help it. It's hard.
Maria, I think one of my teachers, one of my mentors, told me or taught me that we are our own worst critics to ourselves. So forgive yourself for being the wonderful teacher that you are, because I'm sure you reach a lot of children, and focusing on what you're still improving on probably shouldn't take away from what you've already accomplished. Now, so the strategy you shared, it sounds to me that it's not a linguistic problem. So the students understand your Spanish and you understand theirs. There's not a linguistic disconnect, correct? Right. Is it possible that given the demographic and ethnic mix in Bolivia compared to Argentina, that your Bolivian students are maybe a little bit more indigeno than your Argentinian students? So is there, okay.
Yes.
So there's maybe there is a perception that the students are taught from their cultural norm that the Blanca is to be not confronted, or I can't speak up in front of my white teacher because I myself am indigeno or morena or whatever, and there is a perceived hierarchical disconnect?
Most probably, although I make really great efforts to look at them in on the same level, let's say, but there must be something I show that makes them feel ashamed or something.
Okay.
So I still have to develop lots of things.
Have you talked to the parents?
And also respect their own way, I think.
What do the parents of these students tell you when you talk to the parents? What do they say?
We have very little contact with parents because parents work long hours, at least here in Argentina. So parents rely a lot on the school, and parents feel that their students have to do whatever the teacher says. But I feel and I notice that children suffer a lot if we make them follow our model. So
Yes.
I want to empathize with them in a way, so that's the hard part, because parents say, whenever you have the chance to talk to parents, they say, no, but you should be demanding with them. Okay, I am demanding, but I can't force your child to speak or to do something that your child doesn't want to do. So this is the hardest part.
Expectations of your level of authority. So you would like to be more collaborative, and some parents will ask you to be more demanding authoritative, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Maria, may I say a word? Thank you.
Yes, of course. You can help me,
to have you here and see and pose before this problem of communication. I would go back to the simplest communication strategy or idea that we have in mind. Whenever we communicate, there is what we say, what we think we have communicated, what the other one has understood. So maybe checking for that, what I said and what I meant by my words, and listening to them to see what they have understood from what I said. Maybe they take your words as a warning or as an obligation, actually confirming, and that's right, saying it as many times in different ways and finding out what got from my message over there in any type of communication, not just with teaching, right?
Yes, and another detail I'd like to add is that they are teens, they are adolescents. So no matter what culture they are from or they belong to, I think that they have this kind of rebellious ingredient. So this is also something that sums or adds to the whole situation, you know. Well, we'll have to keep on working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And I haven't said this yet, so let me say it now before we run out of time. I have the utmost respect for all of you in teaching professions, because you are the people who give a map, or who give a toolbox for our kids to draw their own map, and you show them how to make a very efficient map. And thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you, all of you, for being here.